Good afternoon and welcome to our Hawkeye Parents and Families webinar series. My name is Danielle Martinez and I work in academic support and retention, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. These monthly webinars are designed to provide you with up-to-date information that may apply to your students' transition to the University of Iowa. Here, we understand that you're an important part of your student support system, and they may continue to seek your advice and guidance on a variety of issues. We hope that these webinars provide you with a platform for us to consistently engage with you by providing a proactive and open forum for questions, concerns, and dialogue. Our webinar today is Handling Homesickness, Strategies for Success, and is hosted by our office, Academic Support and Retention, and University Counseling Service. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Paula Keaton with us today as our presenter. Paula serves as the Director of Clinical Services at University Counseling Service, and as a licensed psychologist, Paula is committed to social justice and leadership, and some of her specialty areas include relationship and family concerns and self-esteem concerns. Some of you may remember Paula from her amazing session during summer orientation entitled Letting Go. I know that it's my favorite session every year at orientation. Today, Paula will address strategies for success for your student when dealing with issues of homesickness. As a reminder, each webinar is recorded and then posted on the Academic Support and Retention website so it can be accessed at a later date or viewed by individuals who were not able to attend the live webinar. Therefore, during the presentations, your mic functions will be muted. Later on, we'll have a question and answer portion. So without further ado, we'll take it away with Paula.
Thank you, Danielle. As she said, we're going to be talking about homesickness today, and not only about homesickness, but how it impacts your students and their success. And I do want to point out my voice is coming in and out a little bit from allergies. It's not your speaker, it's my voice, and I may be clearing my voice a little bit every once in a while. So we do have some goals. Oh, there we go. There's me. I'm in my office there in that picture at University Counseling Service. So we'll have an opportunity to talk about those services in a little bit. So I have a few goals that I like to lay out for us today. And the first one is to gain a clear understanding of what homesick is and what it isn't. I think we all make some assumptions about that, but really learning to recognize that homesickness looks a little different for each person. Secondly, hopefully we can get some further understanding about the impact that homesickness can have on a student's success, and we'll be talking about it specifically here at the University of Iowa. Third, hopefully we can identify some ways in which you can best support your homesick student. I'm of the belief system that creativity is going to be your best friend in this, because I want to recognize that you do know your students best. We're here to support them, but we know that you've been in that role up to this point when you've kind of handed them off to the University of Iowa. And lastly, I hope that you will be able to learn about resources here on campus, particularly University Counseling Service. That's what I'm going to be best versed in as we talk about these things. So that first question, what is homesickness? Well, homesickness is the uneasiness, discomfort, distress, and or impairment that someone experiences due to being away from one's familiar and safe environment. You'll see those four highlighted words, and that's how we're going to break down this first part of the webinars. We're going to talk about uneasiness and what that looks like, discomfort and what that looks like, distress and what that looks like, and then lastly, impairment. I do see homesickness on a continuum of sorts. Recognizing that everybody gets a little bit homesick, especially if we think about homesickness as in kind of uncomfortable emotions one is experiencing when they're away from what's familiar and safe. For example, for myself, I know if I'm on a long vacation, even though I'm on vacation and having an amazing time, I might get a little bit homesickness. I miss my dog, I miss my house. But, that is kind of in that uneasiness realm. And I know that's kind of a weird example, but I want you to know that homesickness can be really, really, really broad. Homesickness is not so much about one thing. It's not about missing your stuff, like your comfy bed or your comfortable pillow or that amazing TV that you may have on the wall at home. And it's not singularly just about people. It's often not just about you as parents. It's not just about maybe the girlfriend or boyfriend or partner that the student is away from. It's not just about pets, although that's often a target that will get students really emotional if they talk about their pets back home. It's not just about, maybe the amazing meals you make for your student when they're home. It's a combination of all of these things. And it comes down to this familiarity and this notion of perceived safety. When students are feeling homesick, it is this lack of knowledge of what the environment is and how to work within it. So let's break it down into these 4 areas. Let's talk about uneasiness to begin with. As I mentioned, most folks experience some level of uneasiness in new environments, and that could be going to a new workplace. That could be coming to the University of Iowa for the first time. It might mean moving into a new neighborhood. It's a really, really common experience, this notion of uneasiness. And most college students, they do experience some level of homesickness. And I do mean most college students, even those students who are super independent. They do experience some amount of longing for that which is familiar. And that which is familiar is often you, your home, the environment, and as I said, a combination of a lot of things. With this notion of uneasiness, we're talking about mild homesickness. It's really a very typical reaction to periods of rapid change and adjustment, like beginning college. One day they're at home with you, they know the routine, they have all this familiarity, and the next day they're here arriving on campus with 5,000 other new folks into a community of 30,000 plus, big buildings, big environment. For some of you in smaller towns, like the students' experience is that maybe their residence hall actually has more people than their entire hometown. This is a big change for many students, and they struggle with getting their minds wrapped around it. Conversely, you may be in a more urban environment where you come to Iowa City and the University of Iowa and it feels like small town USA. It feels like everybody knows your business. So it really is a matter of perspective, and it's change and adjustment. It doesn't matter if it's from big to small, small to big, or somewhere in between. There's, with uneasiness about homesickness being so common, it does transform into easiness or comfort when a student makes friends, when the student finds a routine, when a student discovers what his or her or their new normal might be. It does require some effort on students, but the environment is built to make that effort kind of easy, especially if they're in a residence hall. So again, this notion of uneasiness about homesickness, it's so typical, and so many students are experiencing it. So the next step is discomfort. And discomfort really is one step further along the homesickness continuum. This is when, notions of worry and nervousness and mild sadness are beginning to creep in. It's not at a super troublesome level at this point. And maybe your student's getting cranky and maybe a little overreactive to things you might say. I think that people at this level of homesickness, like they get a little snappy and discounting, and what may have been helpful before isn't helpful now. But it's starting to move along the continuum. Within this too, the calls home to you may increase and become more emotional. And you might find that your student is experiencing maybe a small social slight. Maybe they didn't get invited to go down to dinner with their roommate, but then it feels like a very, very big violation. So things can shift in terms of perspective. For folks at this level of homesickness and this notion of just discomfort, for the students who are a little more self-aware, we kind of use the phrase psychological mindedness. They're able to reflect and look at themselves These are the folks that are likely to reach out for some kind of support or help. And that might be the counseling service, but probably unlikely. They're more or less, they're going to talk to their roommates, they're going to talk to folks that they've met in clubs or in class, they might talk to their RA. And often at this level, merely talking about it really, really reduces the heat on the discomfort that goes along with this stage. So again, similar to that first one, this notion of discomfort, it can transform into comfort when a student makes friends, finds a routine, and discovers what their new normal might be. And we're going to talk about how these transformations can happen a little bit later in the webinar. The next step, I guess, on this continuum is this notion of distress in response to homesickness. A homesick student begins experiencing distress when they are struggling to adjust to their new life experiences at college. And I'm not talking about just like, oh, this is a little bit uncomfortable. It's that, some bigger process is happening for them. Folks at this stage, they're starting to experience, more persistent anxiousness or persistent depression. They may have high or low emotionality. And what I mean by that is that their emotions may be kind of all over the place and lots of expressiveness, or they may start to shut down and they give you one-word answers. Even though they're calling you in distress, they're giving you very little information. So it can be anywhere along that line of emotionality. And they also may begin to have academic or social withdrawal. They might be feeling anxious, and so then they skip a class, and then they feel bad about skipping class, and then they realize they skipped class, they missed an opportunity to make friends. So things can start to snowball in a way. So these are some of the things to look out for in your students. And students at this stage, they're starting to feel alone. It doesn't mean that they are alone, but they have a sense of aloneness. Maybe they're not able to find enough comfort to talk to somebody willingly about what's going on for them. But, we often see these students at the counseling service when you, as a parent or caregiver, or maybe a staff member, refers them to us. So this often happens that maybe an RA or someone in residence education notices that your student's looking down, and they'll check in with them, and the student may share a little bit, and then will be provided resources, and University Counseling Service is one of those resources. And still, this distress can transform into well-being when the student makes friends, when they find a routine, and I've inserted here, and when they get help, and that they're able to find their new normal. We see a lot of students at the counseling center that are kind of in this phase of homesickness. They're feeling unable to generate new ideas of how to make connections, or they're starting to get very fixated on the notion that home is good and school is bad. And for me, that's one of the indicators that they might really need some external help when they start articulating that. When they're kind of getting on the extremes, starting a lot of black and white thinking. And again, remember, we'll be talking about some things that you can do to help students through this in just a little bit. And lastly, I'm going to take a sip of water, so forgive me. Where students with extreme homesickness, it does lead to a notion of impairment. And I know impairment can kind of be a scary word. Impairment does not imply that it's permanent impairment. It just really means that there are some blocks in their lives where they're not able to move forward on their own. So a student who has become impaired due to homesickness is likely experiencing diagnosable depression and anxiety. And I know diagnosable can be a scary word, but when we're able to pull together that information and maybe land on a diagnosis, it really helps us as clinicians be the most helpful to the student in front of us. Folks at this stage also are likely shutting down emotionally, or they're feeling highly agitated. Some hopelessness and some helplessness might slip in. say this very carefully, and I hope you can absorb this. Sometimes students at this phase, the hopelessness and helplessness gets to the level where they may have a suicidal thought. And it's really what, with the word impairment, that's what we're talking about, where they're losing touch with how to live their life. Some thoughts of self-harm might come in, and this really is an indicator to us that they need help. And at this phase too, they might be considering whether college is the right fit for them at this time. That doesn't mean that they can't be a college student. It just means that they're starting to question and consider whether the timing is right for them and the challenges that they may have. For these folks, as I mentioned, some form of mental health service is typically warranted for students whose homesickness has led to a level of impairment. And as long as they remain a student here at the University of Iowa, this is really where we come in as a counseling service, to really engage with the students to help them work through this really difficult stage, how to manage their emotions in healthier ways, how to strategize about ways for self-soothing and self-care. And often with students at this stage, we're working in partnership with Student Health and Wellness, the psychiatrist there. Medication may be helpful to some of these students. It may not be helpful to other students as well. We don't assume any particular path for students who are at this stage of homesickness. I think it's important to note that students at this stage can recover and can become successful students. However, the path and timing of recovery will be specific to each individual. I've worked with students who needed to, maybe withdraw, go home, regroup, and then they come back and they have an amazing college experience. Some of these folks, they struggle for that first year with depression and anxiety and adjustment. But you know what? They're still being a student. They're still engaged, and they're working through it, despite maybe some of the challenges. And again, we want to look at goodness of fit. We're highly invested in students here at the University of Iowa and having students be successful here. But we also want to recognize that sometimes, on occasion, this is not the perfect fit for some students. And we want to help them figure out the path that's going to lead to their greatest, not only academic, but personal success. Some of the other things I want to mention here, things that you can look out for your students, is that some students at this level, they're starting to have some pretty significant sleep disruption. Maybe their minds are racing and it's hard for them to get rest. And we know that students, or anybody who's sleep deprived, they struggle with good decision making, they struggle with memory. So checking in with your students about sleep is a really important thing. And similarly, some students, especially if they're anxious, they get stomach aches, it's hard to eat. So checking in with them about what they're eating, when they're eating, and helping strategize with them nutritious foods that aren't going to upset their stomach. And some students will resort to some form of substance abuse at this stage. And honestly, that really does take them down a path that will prove to be more difficult, because we know that substances only mute the difficult emotions. It doesn't really do anything to make them go away, and actually it adds on to more difficulties. And for you might be receiving more frantic and desperate calls from your student. We're going to talk a little bit about how to respond to those here. So in general, I know that this is kind of implied, but I thought I'd list it out here. So why are we talking about this? Well, it impacts student success. It impacts their sense of well-being. Homesick students often struggle with these things that are related to college. They struggle with adjusting to the rigors of college, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. If someone's feeling depressed and or anxious, and then they're encountering difficult material that they've never had to deal with before, those can really interact and impact even the way they perceive their capacity to be. Some students are more prepared for difficult course material than others. For students who are encountering difficult course material and feeling overwhelmed, there are lots of resources, especially through academic retention and support services, the especially for those in Chem 1 and such. There's a lot of help for students feeling overwhelmed with the demands. Homesick students often struggle with making friends and feeling like they fit in. And although that's not directly about academics, I want to point out that folks who feel like they're part of a community, they feel like they're fitting in, they do better academically, they do better physically, they do better emotionally, and all of those things will contribute to academic success. Homesick students often struggle with staying on campus on the weekends. If they're yearning for home and going home all the time, and then pointing out how they don't have friends and they don't feel connected to the university, that's kind of a equation that leads to more distress. And for those of you who've been to my Letting Go talks, you know that this is one of my big points that I land on. It's important for students to stay on campus and to increase their opportunity for connection and engagement. Again, we know that engaged students do better across the board. And we're going to talk about the going home thing here in a couple minutes as well. Homesick students often struggle with procrastination, disorganization. I guess I'd throw in there too problems with focus and attention. And that's connected to depression and anxiety as well. And often we can really help students figure out ways to manage procrastination, disorganization, and perfectionism, which can often get in the way of concrete products to hand in. And lastly, homesick students really struggle with self-doubt about their capacity to succeed. And that just kind of goes in hand with anxiety and depression and feeling like they're not at home. So what can you all do to help your students? I have a list of 12 things, 12 suggestions, and as Danielle pointed out, this presentation will be available to you so you can go back and review these things at your leisure. So one of the first things you can do is to acknowledge their homesickness. A lot of students I talk to say that their parents will kind of say, "Oh, no, you don't need to feel that. Look at these amazing opportunities." Well, students, if they're feeling homesick, they're feeling homesick, and to kind of validate that is their lived experience and to let them vent a little bit with you. And one of the things that students have told me that is the most helpful thing they can get from their parents is when one of you will share that you've been through something similar and that you successfully gotten through it. It helps them feel normal, if there is such thing as feeling normal, but I think it's a really important thing to share if that has been part of your experience. And I guess I want you to remember that increased independence is a goal for your student. You can give them support, but you have to keep in mind that they're the ones who must take the steps toward adjustment. If you can help them figure out ways to calm themselves down, or you can strategize with them on how to get connected, that's going to be some of the best things that you can do for them, but you can't take the steps for them. Again, those of you who've been in my Letting Go talk, I feel strongly that parents should not speak on behalf of their students, especially by calling instructors and such, but please do help them do that on their own. It's going to increase their confidence and it's going to increase their adjustment. Let them know that you believe in them. They're struggling with believing in themselves. So help reminding them of their successes and how they have gotten through difficult times. You get to be their number one fan, and I think that they really, really appreciate that. And then you can also help them identify small, achievable goals that will lead towards their adjustment to college. Many students will say, "I just want to feel completely comfortable here." Well, we know that things don't go from bad to good in mere seconds, but that there are going to be small steps along the way. And that might mean looking with them at the organizations available on campus and helping them pick out one, and maybe encouraging them to write a single email to the leader. So small things that are going to help them get connected. Maybe that means encouraging them to go to a study session just one time. They don't have to commit for the whole semester, but to help them identify opportunities that can kind of contradict what they're believing about their environment if it's negative. You can encourage them to talk to others who have successfully managed this transition. Maybe you have older kids in your family system that's made it through it. Maybe it's a beloved aunt or uncle who can share with them how they've made it through. Just to, again, it's kind of to build some hopefulness. You know, maybe, again, it's the next door neighbor who has made it through, whoever that they trust and would, you know, accept some input from. And then this is a hard one for parents sometimes, to help them stay connected to both of their homes. Yes, their home, there is a sense of home with you, but they're creating a new sense of home here in Iowa City and at the University of Iowa. And that I think that, you know, attachment and good feelings, those are things that just, they divide and multiply. It's not that they're taking away anything from their home with you, or, you know, it's just that it's sort of like a flame. It can be equally bright in both places. So we have a few more to go through here. I want to encourage you to urge them to get to know their new environment and get involved. I mean, getting a campus map and just walking around and figuring out what's where can actually help someone feel like they're a little bit more in control of their environment, that it doesn't feel so unfamiliar or foreign to them. And I mentioned this earlier, but remind them about good self-care, that they're getting getting nutritious food, that they're sleeping, that they're exercising, that they're either limiting or not using any kind of substances that's going to get in the way of them getting to a healthier place. And then help them strategize how to spend as much time connecting with old friends as they do with their new friends. Sometimes homesick students get fixated and idealize the friendships that have led them up to this point, and they pour so much energy into those friendships that they forget to make connections in their current environment. Again, I think there's an issue of time. You know, if they're spending an hour FaceTiming with a friend back home, encourage them to spend an hour of face-to-face time with an acquaintance or new friend here on campus. And set a date for visits with you. I think it's important to curtail impulsive home visits, because those often increase homesickness rather than decrease. I think if your student's struggling, talk to them about when would be a good time to visit, whether that's family weekend that's coming up at the end of this month, or maybe coming in for a football game, or just coming in to take them to dinner. But to have something kind of on the calendar so that this can instill hope in them. And remember, you can come visit them. Visiting them on campus is probably even more valuable than them coming home to you. It's going to help them validate that this is a good environment, that this is a safe environment, and it's going to maybe relieve some of your own insecurities about what's happening in their world here. If you're able to demonstrate confidence, I think that your students will pick up on that as well. And part of this is giving them time to adjust. I know that I think we're at the end of week 6, which means that we're more than 2/3 of the way through this semester. And some students are just now starting to feel homesick. Some of them have been struggling with it all 6 weeks. Some of them maybe have worked through it and they're feeling really, really well adjusted and content here. But each person's going to have their own timeline that this happens on. And I don't think that means that one person is more mentally healthy than the next one, but we each do things at our own unique paces. And then this last one is, if homesickness persists or really is interfering with academic or social connection, that's when really I think you recommending that they come visit us is going to be really, really important. Unfortunately, often we see students that are so far into their homesickness that it has become depression, it has become anxiety, and it just takes a lot more effort and time to work through that. If your son or daughter, if if you're the caregiver of another student, like if they can start addressing these things when it's at the low to moderate range, it just lends itself to a smoother process. So I want to encourage you to really be paying attention to how they're adjusting and to encourage them to get help as needed. And that help might be talking to their RA. Joining an organization. Help can come in many, many different formats. It doesn't just mean that they need counseling. So if they do need counseling, though, let me give you some information about this, and then we're going to open it up to some questions. University Counseling Service, we have a number of services: consultation, group and individual counseling, case management. All of these services are free and confidential. If your student is 18 years or older, we look at their records just like we would look at your own medical records. If a student chooses to sign a release of information, of course we can share with you whether or not they're receiving service. But it really is up to them whether or not they choose to release that information. At the counseling service, we see approximately 2,000 students per year, and we see folks for a whole wide range of things, from really mild homesickness to, time management, up to more serious mental health concerns, serious depression, serious anxiety, eating disorders. But we work with students across the whole range. We have 12 doctoral level psychologists on staff, 1 case manager, and multiple doctoral trainees in our agency. And that's how we're able to see as many students as we do. Our trainees are really the most helpful. And students, frankly, they appreciate sometimes working with someone who's a little closer to their own age. And we're happy to consult with you about your concerns for your students. But please remember that students must make their own appointments if they're going to come to UCS. I probably talk to a couple parents a week, strategizing with them about how to help them help their student get help. We're located in the West Lawn building, which is, again, on the west side of the river. It's the same building as Student Health and Wellness, although we're separate agencies. The Red Line, the Blue Line, Pennacrest, so, most of the buses go right past our building, and we have a stop right in front of our building. And for more information about us, please visit our webpage and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep updated on what mental health issues might be on campus right now. But there is a wealth of information on that page. And of course, also all of our contact information is on there. So in short, homesickness can be a wide range of experiences. And just like each of you have a unique experience with your student, I know that some of you may have unique or specific questions for me that I'd be happy to address. And I think Danielle's going to help facilitate this process.
Absolutely. So just a few reminders. Thank you so much, Paula, for the great information on sort of the continuum of homesickness, information on UCS, and your 12 steps on how parents can support students who are experiencing homesickness. So just a reminder that we have a lot of folks on the webinar, and so Paula is unable to answer specific things about your student's experience, but able to answer more general questions that may be helpful in guiding your student. If you have a question, please type it into the question box, and then we'll read the question out loud so all participants can hear, and then Paula can answer. If we are unable to get to your question during the webinar, we will follow up with you via email to make sure that we have answered your question. So we will go ahead and get started. We'll start to see if any questions start coming in. Oh, looks like we have one. So it looks like some folks want to know if UCS can make connections with counselors back home, so care can be continued over breaks.
Yeah, we are more than happy to do so. Part of that process is your student requesting that of us. It's a really common practice for mental health clinicians to consult with one another when we share clients, whether they're transferring care back home, or for some students, they're transferring care here, having been seeing a therapist. The student would, again, need to ask us about that so we can get kind of all the information correct and get a release of information signed.
We have a question around if students feel an increase in homesickness during sort of Thanksgiving and winter break time.
Some students do, because especially, Thanksgiving break, that fall break is an entire week. And so they get back into that routine at home and they get back into that familiarity. And it's, for some students, it makes it difficult for them to come back to the university. But at the same time, sometimes students who have been struggling, they just need that week to chill and to sleep and have you make their favorite meal and fuss over them a little bit. It kind of gives them the boost they need to finish the semester off successfully. And I think that winter break, given the length, I think it's a good opportunity to have some real heart-to-heart conversations with your students about fit and what's going to work best for them. I think we have a really good retention of students who come back from fall semester into spring semester. So yeah, it can sometimes be the very thing they need to help them get through the end of the semester, or sometimes it can impact them in a way that sets them back. But I think it's more of the first.
We have a question around how to handle frantic text messages. And so thinking about communication plans, like what would be helpful when you get those frantic phone calls or texts?
So, personally, I love text messaging, but that's usually like, hey, let's meet at 5 o'clock, or are you coming over later? I think that text messages that contain a lot of emotional content can get really spun out of control. So my recommendation is, if you're getting frantic text messages, that you all get on the phone and actually talk. And then that way it's a smoother exchange. You can be a little more planful. You can be more clearly supportive. And again, as any of you who've attended the Letting Go talk, hopefully prior to any of this, you all would have come up with a reasonable communication plan. And maybe that means revisiting that communication plan. And it might be, if you're super upset, please give me a call, or let's use a text message to arrange a time to talk, as opposed to using the text messages as the talk.
Awesome. We have a parent who is from the East Coast, and so talking about that traveling here to visit or the student traveling home is not really possible except for those longer breaks. And so sort of how do you manage those longer periods? So far this seems like the student's doing okay, but knowing that they won't be here for parents' weekend, and that till winter break is kind of a long time.
Yeah, hopefully y'all are talking about that right now, and talking about how your student anticipates they're going to feel when you're not able to make it for parents' weekend, when a lot of their friends are, and that, having that not be a surprise is a really important piece. I think that the electronic communication can be sometimes overused, but it sometimes can be underutilized as well. There's the beauty of Skype or FaceTime is that there are opportunities for you to see their environment and help kind of understand what life is like here. And that might mean that they take you on a campus tour with FaceTime. And I know that sounds a little silly, but it really does help them engage and explain to you what their world is like. I think communication over the phone, Skype, FaceTime can be super valuable if you're further away than a 6-hour drive or so. But again, it's to keep talking about it, not let it slip off the radar that there really is a real physical distance between the two of you. So Daniel's reading here.
So there's a question around perceptions of social media. So that students are seeing that their friends are having a great time at their colleges on social media, and so that might make the student feel isolating. How do you help, as a parent, the student navigate that?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think the way people portray themselves on social media tend to be either way more positive than what their life experience is, or sometimes way more negative than what their life experience is. I know that I can with confidence say that there's a certain level of homesickness that everybody wrestles with, and your student is never alone in that. They may need to speak up about it so they can discover that they're not alone. But to really look at social media with a little bit of a skeptic's eye, that things are not always as they perceive. And there's some pretty good research out there that says that we don't fully express what's going on in our real lives on social media. So have a little bit of a skeptic's eye about that. And then again, it's this one-way viewing of that kind of information really can create some distortion. That if your student is feeling like they are the only one and they're getting all of that information from social media, that maybe that is the time when they pick up and make a phone call to their friend to talk about like real life and what's happening within like that relationship that's already hopefully safe.
Well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much to our presenter, Dr. Paula Keaton, and thank you all for joining us today. All webinars will be posted online at uc.uiowa.edu/family-resources. If you are unable to get a question answered during the webinar, we'll follow up with you via email. Additional questions can always be sent to our office, uc-retention@uiowa.edu, for a response from a university staff member. Please join us next month from high school to college, Mental Health and Student Disability Resources on Friday, October 6th from noon to 1, and that will be hosted by Academic Support and Retention, Student Disability Services, and the Office of the Dean of Students. Thanks so much for joining us today on Iowa. Go Hawks!